Vatican, October 15th, 2023. There is something profoundly unsettling about walking alone through the corridors of the Vatican after sunset. By day, the place overflows with life and religious fervor. By night, it transforms into a prison of shadows and silence. The marble statues and columns stretched around me like slumbering giants as I made my way toward the secret archives, a place rarely visited, even by the highest-ranking clergy. As a newly ordained priest, this was my first real assignment, and the most mysterious one I could imagine. My name is Matteo, and since the moment I was called to serve at the Vatican, I felt that something else awaited me in the depths of that place. However, I never imagined that this calling would lead me to the most hidden and dangerous archives at the heart of the Church. That night, I was summoned by Cardinal Vitorini, one of the oldest and most influential men in the Holy See. A man of few words and many secrets, even at 80, his presence made any room feel smaller. His call came to me on a worn piece of paper, discreetly delivered by a silent acolyte during the last Mass of the day. The message was simple. Father Matteo, report to the archives after the 9th hour. Do not speak to anyone. Vitorini. There was nothing more written, only that order. That message haunted me as I walked through the empty halls. The Vatican, vast as it was, seemed at night like a kingdom of its own, where God's light seemed reluctant to illuminate certain corners. As I reached the entrance of the secret archives, a shiver ran down my spine. The archives were guarded by an enormous iron door, adorned with symbols I could barely understand. There was something archaic about those carvings, something that seemed to predate the Church itself. With trembling hands, I touched the cold, heavy handle. To my surprise, the door opened with ease. Upon entering, I was greeted by a vast expanse of shelves stretching infinitely, filled with ancient scrolls, books, and relics from a lost era. The smell of mold and old parchment flooded my senses. The cardinal was there, standing at the back of the room, amid shadows swaying gently in the dim candlelight. "You've arrived on time, Father Matteo," he said without turning. His voice echoed in the vast stone hall, amplified by the natural acoustics of the place. I approached, still not understanding the true reason for my summons. My hands were sweating under my cassock, and each step seemed to echo endlessly. The cardinal held a rolled-up scroll, yellowed with age, but his eyes were fixed on an ancient book, open on a dark wooden pedestal. He appeared lost in the words he read, until he finally turned to me. "There are things in this world, Father Matteo, that must never be revealed. Secrets the Church has kept locked away for centuries. This place," he gestured around the room, "is more than just an archive. It is a fortress of unspeakable secrets. And now you have been chosen to know one of them." I swallowed hard, unable to respond. The air around us seemed heavier, as if something invisible was watching us closely. Cardinal Vitorini looked at me with his tired eyes, but there was a serious gleam there, an urgency that could not be ignored. "What do you know about the beast?" he asked, as if testing me. My heart raced in my chest. I had heard whispers, stories told in the shadows of the corridors by older priests. They spoke of an ancient creature, something the Church kept secret, something that had been sealed long ago. But they were just legends, or so I thought. "I've heard rumors, Eminence," I replied, my voice faltering slightly. "Something about a creature sealed beneath the Vatican, but I've never heard details. I always thought they were just stories to scare novices like me." The cardinal let out a heavy sigh, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Those stories are real, Matteo. More real than anything you can imagine. And the reason you were called here tonight is because something has happened. Something has changed in the seals that keep the beast dormant." The silence that followed felt eternal. The cardinal then turned, picked up the book from the pedestal, and carefully showed me the open page. The manuscript was covered in symbols I did not immediately recognize, except for one, a circle with zigzagging lines that seemed to form some sort of prison. Below the symbol, in ancient Latin, were the words "Mactare Eterna Custodia," which I vaguely translated as "Eternal Sacrifice of Guardians." "This symbol," Vitorini continued, "is the seal that keeps the beast asleep. It was created millennia ago, long before the Vatican was built, by the first servants of God. But something, or someone, has weakened it. I felt my blood run cold. It was impossible, but the cardinal spoke with a terrible certainty. "And you, Matteo, have been chosen to help reinforce the seal." My heart nearly stopped at that moment. How could I, a simple priest, face something so vast and horrible, even without knowing exactly what it was? The growing sense of terror inside me was undeniable. Before I could respond, the cardinal pulled a black key, intricately forged from his robes, and placed it in my hands. "Beneath this sanctuary, in the deepest levels, lies the chamber of the beast. There, we will find what we need to perform the ritual. You must trust me, Father. Faith is your only weapon." His words weighed on me, and despite the rising fear, I knew I could not refuse. Something ancient had awakened, and I was now part of a battle that transcended my understanding. We descended through a narrow, dark staircase, each step taking us deeper into the bowels of the Vatican, miles below the Holy City. The path was lit only by torches fixed to the stone walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed alive. The smell of dampness and earth was overwhelming, mixed with the musty air that existed only in places untouched by sunlight for centuries. As we descended, the weight of the atmosphere seemed to grow. I felt as if gravity itself was increasing, pulling us further into an abyss of inescapable darkness. The cardinal remained silent, his steps heavy and steady, guiding us through a labyrinth of tunnels I never knew existed. "The chamber was built before the Vatican itself," he said, breaking the silence as we stopped before an immense stone door, adorned with symbols I could not understand. "Ancient orders raised it, and only the highest of the church know what is sealed within." The key he had given me trembled in my hand, as if something beyond my control was acting upon it. The cardinal motioned for me to open the door. With hesitation, I inserted the key into the lock, and a deep metallic sound echoed as the door began to move. As soon as we crossed the threshold, I felt a wave of dense energy engulf my body. It was as if we had entered a different reality, where time and space distorted. The room was vast, larger than any chamber I had seen before, with stone walls adorned with ancient paintings depicting battles between indescribable creatures and men wielding flaming crosses. At the center stood a black altar, encrusted with arcane symbols. But what truly dominated the room was the presence of a structure at the far end, a massive iron cage wrapped in rusted chains that seemed to vibrate slightly. Inside, a shadow moved, though I could not discern its exact form. Something was trapped there, something ancient, something alive. "The beast," the cardinal whispered, reverently gazing at the figure in the cage. "It must never be freed." My breath caught in my chest. Whatever was inside that cage emitted a palpable sense of pure evil. The darkness itself seemed to pulse around it, making it impossible to identify its true form. It was like looking at a living shadow, moving in ways the human mind should not comprehend. "The seal is breaking," the cardinal said, pointing to the chains around the cage. "If we don't act quickly, it will escape." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to ask the only question that mattered at that moment. "How do we reinforce the seal?" The cardinal pulled a small vial from his robes, containing a thick, dark liquid, and handed it to me. "Blood," he said bluntly. "The beast feeds on the life force of those who face it. Only a sacrifice of pure blood can restore the balance. You must follow the ritual described in the manuscript and offer your own blood to strengthen the chains." The mere mention of the word sacrifice made my stomach churn. I had been trained to serve God, not to deal with monsters from the depths. But now, it was clear that there was no other option. The cardinal handed me the vial of blood with a gravity that weighed on us both, as if he already knew the sacrifice that was about to take place. I felt the weight of his decision, but also the lack of choice in the situation that surrounded me. The cage before me pulsed like a living heart, and the shadow within seemed to expand and contract as if it were breathing. The beast was aware of our presence, even though it was trapped and it felt hungry. I couldn't take my eyes off the figure behind the rusted chains. No matter how dark or indistinct its form, it had a tangible physical presence, an amorphous mass of pure evil that seemed to distort reality itself around it. When I looked directly at it, For a brief second, I felt the air escape my lungs, as if something invisible had gripped my chest. "Quickly, Father Matteo," Cardinal Vitorini spoke with urgency, breaking my momentary trance. "The seal is weak, and the beast is feeding on our hesitation." With trembling hands, I walked to the altar, where the ritual was to begin. The vial in my hand seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if the blood inside it was also under some influence. The altar was adorned with ancient symbols, carved into the stone in a way that almost suggested movement. Being near it made my skin tingle. "Place the vial in the center," instructed the cardinal, gesturing toward a small circular depression in the altar where the blood was to be poured. I followed his instructions, pouring the thick liquid into the groove, and immediately, something in the room seemed to shift. The floor began to vibrate slightly, and the symbols carved into the walls of the chamber started to glow with a red light, as if they had been activated by some hidden mechanism. "Now the sacrifice." The cardinal approached, handing me a silver dagger, its edges so sharp it seemed to glint in the candlelight. "Your blood will be the final link to restore the chains. But know, Matteo, that the beast will try to manipulate your mind during the ritual. It will use your greatest fears against you." My body froze. The idea of offering my own blood to reinforce a mystical seal over a creature of pure evil was terrifying enough. But the threat that this beast would invade my mind with my deepest insecurities, that was too much. Yet I could not hesitate. There was something terrible in his eyes, something that told me the situation was worsening. The chains around the cage began to writhe threateningly. I gripped the dagger tightly, and before I could doubt any further, I slashed the palm of my hand. The warm blood dripped onto the altar, mixing with the thick liquid in the center, and immediately a reaction was triggered. An invisible wind swept through the room, as if a portal had been opened, and the chains around the cage glowed intensely. The cardinal began reciting words in ancient Latin, his voice echoing through the chamber, amplified by the very structure around us. The sound reverberated in my ears like distant thunder, and the energy in the room grew even denser, suffocating. Suddenly, I heard a voice. It wasn't the cardinal's, nor mine. It was a cold, whispering voice, something that seemed to come directly from within my mind. "Matteo, you cannot stop me," the voice murmured, slow and seductive. "Your faith is a lie. You know this. You feel this. What the church truly hides is not salvation, but the very darkness." My bleeding hand trembled, and my mind began to spin. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to block out that voice, but it persisted, as if it was whispering directly into my soul. "You are not worthy of sacrifice. You are weak, just like those who came before you. They failed. Everyone fails." The voice was a soft poison, drenching my mind with doubts. "You can break the chains, Matteo. Free me, and I will give you what you have always wanted." I tried to focus on the cardinal's prayer, using his words as a shield against the mental invasion the creature was attempting. But more and more, my mind wavered. The room began to spin around me. The torchlight flickered, and the air seemed to turn into a thick substance, hard to breathe. Images flashed through my mind. My past, my sins, all the doubts I had carried silently over the years. My mother's tear-streaked face, begging me not to follow the path of the priesthood. The feeling of abandonment I experienced when I left my small village to pursue religious life. The guilt that always haunted me, that I was running away from something, not toward my faith. The voices inside me multiplied. Now, it was no longer just the beasts. They were the voices of my former superiors, who had always criticized me for my failures. The voices of the older priests, who looked at me with suspicion, as if they knew my deepest fears. "You cannot do this, Matteo!" The beast's voice sounded again, this time louder, dominating the whirlwind of thoughts. "Surrender, and it will all end. Your sacrifice is unnecessary. Just accept what is already predestined." A scream burst from within me, a silent plea for strength. The cardinal, still reciting the ritual, looked at me urgently. He knew I was on the verge of being consumed. He knew the beast was pulling me into the abyss. With superhuman effort, I scraped my hand again with the blade, spilling more blood onto the altar. My vision blurred, and the world around me turned into indistinct shadows, as if I were about to lose consciousness. But something changed. I felt a different force take hold of me. The pain in my open hand, the warmth of my blood. They became an anchor. My mind began to clear, if only momentarily. The wind within the chamber ceased, and the chains around the cage shone again, this time with a blinding light. The shadow within the cage recoiled, and the creature's voice, once seductive and manipulative, now turned into screams of anger and despair. "No, this cannot happen. I will awaken. I will destroy you all." The voice of Macterial, the beast, roared, full of hatred. With a final effort, Cardinal Vitorini completed the prayer, his words concluding the ritual. A blinding flash filled the room, temporarily blinding me. When my vision finally returned, I noticed that something had changed. The chains around the cage were firmly reinforced, and the beast, though still present, had retreated to the back of its prison, its presence felt, but weakened. The seal had been restored, at least for now. I collapsed to my knees, exhausted and bleeding, my mind still reeling from the voices that had tried to drag me into madness, but, by a miracle, I had resisted. "It is done," the cardinal said, his voice low but filled with relief. "For now, the beast remains trapped. But remember, Matteo, it will always try to escape, and there will come a day when our defenses will not be enough." I looked at the cardinal, trying to process everything that had happened. There was a weight in his gaze, a truth he had not yet told me, something darker, something I still didn't know. "What are you not telling me, Cardinal?" I asked, my voice weak. The cardinal hesitated, and for a moment I saw fear in his eyes. "There is more than just Macterial in the archives, Matteo. Much more. And we are not the only ones who know this." After the ritual, the path back to the surface of the Vatican seemed infinitely longer than the descent. The silence between me and Cardinal Vitorini was oppressive, filled with unanswered questions and unrevealed secrets. The feeling that something dark still hung over us did not diminish. In fact, the weight seemed to intensify with each step we took away from the underground chamber. When we finally reached the end of the stairs, the fresh air, though stifled by the Vatican's corridors, brought a slight sense of relief. I was alive. I had completed the ritual. But at what cost? Vitorini remained silent as I tried to process what I had just experienced. I had survived the ritual, but deep down, I knew the beast had not been defeated. It was sealed again, but its power was still palpable. Worse yet, the cardinal had made it clear that Macterial was not the only threat. There was more. Much more. We were led down a different corridor, one I hadn't noticed before. The soft torchlight revealed a series of smaller iron doors, each marked with a different symbol. I couldn't decipher their meanings, but each one gave me a strange feeling, as if each hid its own secret, something that should never be discovered. The cardinal stopped in front of a door with a double lock. Without looking at me, he said, "This is the Forbidden Archive, a place where the Church hides humanity's darkest secrets, and those of the faith itself." My eyes widened in surprise. I already knew that the secret archives held texts and relics of unimaginable historical importance, but something about the way he spoke of this specific archive made my blood run cold. "Here, we keep records of other creatures, other beings that the world could never understand. Macterial is only one of them, one of the most powerful, but not the only one." My thoughts raced. How could it be that the Church, an institution of faith and hope, was at the forefront of a prison for these entities? In front of the double iron door, the air around us seemed to vibrate with ancient, untamable energy. My heart pounded in my chest and my stomach churned at the thought that what I had faced in Macterial's chamber was only the beginning. Around me the silence was absolute, almost suffocating. Even the shadows on the walls seemed still, as if they, too, knew that behind that locked door resided secrets humanity was not prepared to face. Cardinal Vitorini held a large bunch of keys in his hands, his fingers hesitant as he chose the right one to open the archive. I could see the weight on his shoulders, the fatigue in his eyes. He was not just a man of God. He was a guardian of secrets that could destroy the faith of those who believed blindly in the Church's purity. That key in his hand symbolized something much greater than simple hidden knowledge. It was the access to a dark power, a door to the true heart of darkness. "You must understand, Matteo. he said in a low voice as he inserted the key into the lock. "What lies behind this door are not just documents or relics. They are the remnants of an ancient war, long before Christ, long before the church, creatures that defy any logic, any belief. What we faced until now was only a fragment of the evil that still crawls in the shadows of the world." His words made me tense. Every syllable seemed heavy, laden with centuries of secrecy and horror. "Then why do we keep these creatures?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice, strained with anxiety. "Why don't we destroy them or send them back to the hell they came from?" The cardinal hesitated for a moment, his tired eyes fixed on the lock. He turned the key with a loud click, and the iron doors slowly opened, creaking, revealing a dark chamber. The torchlight could not fully penetrate the darkness of the place, as if the room itself rejected the light. "Because, Matteo," he said, finally turning to me with a deep look, as if every word were a confession, "we cannot destroy them. We don't have that power, and sending them back to where they belong is a risk the church cannot take. Some of these creatures did not come from hell. They belong neither to heaven nor to hell. They are ancient, and what they want, more than anything, is to destroy the balance of creation." I swallowed hard. Something inside me whispered to run, not to enter that chamber. But there was a stronger call, a need to know, to understand what had been kept secret for so long. "And you want me to see this?" I asked, more to buy time than out of real curiosity. "Why?" The cardinal looked at me deeply, and what I saw in his eyes was the weight of centuries of responsibility. He took a step forward, crossing the threshold into the dark room. "Because, Matteo, you are part of this now. From the moment you touched Macteriel's seal, your soul was marked. There is no going back for you. Your faith will be constantly tested from now on, and if you don't know the truth, the true extent of the evil we fight, you will be consumed, just as so many before you." Each of his words reverberated in my mind like a hammer. I had been marked by Macteriel. My deepest doubts and fears had been explored by that creature, and even with the ritual complete, the echo of its words still resonated in my soul. The idea that this was only the beginning was unbearable. I took a deep breath, gathering the courage to enter that room. When I crossed the threshold, I was immediately engulfed by an oppressive darkness, unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was not just an absence of light, it was a living darkness, a shadow that seemed to move and breathe around me. The walls of the chamber were adorned with ancient shelves filled with scrolls, books, and artifacts. Each object seemed to pulse with its own energy, as if it had a consciousness. At the center of the room, a single black stone table, worn by time, rested under the faint focus of a torch fixed to the opposite wall. Upon it lay an immense scroll, yellowed by time, opened. But what truly caught my attention was what was engraved on the edges of the table. Symbols similar to those carved into Macteriel's cage, but these were even more complex, intricate. There was something profoundly ancient about them, as if they had been written by non-human hands. "This," the cardinal began, approaching the scroll, his voice low and respectful, "is the true record of the creatures that exist in this world. Things that defy any comprehension. Creatures that were hunted and imprisoned by the first guardians. Some of them cannot be seen or touched by humans. Others, like Macteriel, can be imprisoned. For now." Cardinal Vittorini pointed to a particular symbol, a kind of triangle intertwined with curved lines, different from anything I had ever seen. "This mark," he said, "represents a creature even more dangerous than Macteriel, something the Church has kept secret for millennia, an entity whose name must never be spoken. It is sealed far beneath the Vatican, in a chamber even deeper than the one you saw today, and its awakening would mean the end of everything." A chill ran down my spine. More dangerous than Macteriel? How could anything be worse? "But why then do we allow these beings to exist?" I pressed. "If they are so dangerous, why not destroy them or break these seals?" The cardinal lowered his eyes for a moment, as if pondering what he was about to reveal. "Because we have no choice. Some of them cannot be destroyed. They exist beyond our understanding of life and death. The attempts to exterminate them have only led to chaos, destruction. When they were hunted for the first time, many guardians died, and when we sealed them, we made a pact we cannot break." I paused for a moment, trying to absorb everything he was saying. These creatures were connected to the church in a way I could never have imagined. They were not just demons or evil entities that exorcists regularly faced. They were part of something much larger, something much darker. "And what about me?" I asked, more out of desperation than curiosity. Why was I chosen? The cardinal was silent for a while, his gaze fixed on a distant point. Finally, he took a deep breath and answered, "Because, Matteo, you were touched by the beast. It entered your mind, probed your weaknesses, but you resisted. That means you have a strength you don't even understand. The beast now knows you exist, and that makes it more dangerous. But it also makes you someone who can help maintain the other seals. You have been called, Father, just as I was one day, just as many before me." Those words fell upon me like a sentence. I had been chosen to be part of this secret order, to face creatures that should not exist. My mind spun, and a wave of nausea swept over me. The implications of everything the cardinal had said were overwhelming. My faith was being tested, but in a way I could never have predicted. Before I could respond, the cardinal approached the table and rolled the scroll back, hiding the terrifying symbols. He then pulled a small glass vial from his robes, containing a glowing green liquid. "This is an antidote," he said without looking at me, "for what you're feeling now. The beast's influence still resides within you. This liquid will weaken its effects, for a time." I drank the contents of the vial without hesitation. The liquid tasted bitter, almost metallic, but almost immediately I felt a lightness come over me. The voices that had echoed in my mind, whispering doubts and fears, began to fade. The cardinal continued, "You will need this regularly. Macterial's touch does not disappear completely, but as long as you drink this antidote, you will be able to resist." He turned to me, with a look that made me realize he knew exactly what was at stake. There were more secrets to be revealed, more horrors hidden in the depths of the secret archives, but for now I was safe, or at least as safe as one could be amidst so many unseen dangers. "What should we do now?" I asked, my voice trembling. I knew my journey was just beginning. Cardinal Vitorini sighed, closing his eyes for a moment as if he were praying. When he opened them again, there was a grim determination in his gaze. "Now, Father Matteo, you must learn what it means to be a guardian, because there is something much worse than Macterial about to awaken, and this time, not even all the seals in the world will be enough to stop it." That night after leaving the archives, I walked through the Vatican, feeling the weight of the responsibility I now carried. There was no one in the ancient stone corridors except for the shadows and the oppressive silence that echoed around me. The candles burning along the sides of the halls cast a soft but hardly comforting light, and every shadow seemed to harbor secrets that I now knew to be all too real. I thought about everything the cardinal had said. My mind was overloaded with revelations, the creatures the church hid, the pact that had been made centuries ago, and the idea that something even more terrible than Macterial was lurking, waiting for the right moment to break free. But what could be worse than an entity as ancient and malevolent as the beast? My doubts ran deep. Although my faith in God was unwavering, I knew that faith in a human institution could easily be corrupted.